Backstory. I started life in Coon Rapids, Minnesota. It was then more a rural community than the suburb of 65,000 people that it's morphed into. There was no highway to nearby Minneapolis, only a local road that followed the east bank of the Mississippi River. If someone needed directions around Coon Rapids, it was not uncommon to tell them, "Take the dirt road." If you asked a local what the world's main religions were, they'd tell you Lutheran and Catholic. Jewish, for us, was an accent from New York. The common pastime for kids was walking through a pathless prairie with sandy soil that was full of burrs to railroad tracks that we placed various items on. After a freight train passed, we inspected the damage that the steel wheels had done. Occasionally, someone might show up with a gun and a few dozen rounds. We would shoot up the same things that we placed on the tracks to see whether a gun or train did more damage. I remember someone bringing a batch of puppies to the field, which was a similarly big event as a gun. When I turned 12, my family moved about 2 miles away. The Mississippi River was about an 80-yard walk from the back door of our new house. When the water was still, we practiced skipping stones in pursuit of an elusive 40 or more, the number of times the rock skimmed. We'd meticulously select every rock. My friends and I became experts in riverbank geology. The neighbor next door put in a retaining wall and covered the bank with boulders. That was a devastating blow to our skipping rock quarry. After the wall was completed, the best stones were either underwater or under boulders. We stole cigarettes from our parents or from stores where tobacco was on shelves like gum and candy, and got dizzy smoking them while fishing for carp. A new neighbor moved in on the other side, away from the boulders. The new owner, Stanley, immediately set to converting his modest home into some kind of bizarre mansion. He built 3 towers, a tunnel, and added a second floor. It was completely out of place for Coon Rapids. My mother generally could befriend anyone, but her outreaches to Stanley failed. She instructed us to leave him alone and respect his wishes, which in translation meant that she considered Stanley an asshole. On the other side of Stanley lived our classmate, Narf. We played basketball in his driveway. Not walking across Stanley's yard added approximately 250 yards to our walk. After several months of construction, Stanley uncharacteristically feigned to be cordial. He came to our front door and attempted to engage in friendly chit-chat like most neighbors in our town did. After Stanley left, my mother declared, "I do not like or trust that man." She had an outstanding crap detector. Eventually, the source of Stanley's veer towards civility was revealed. He wasn't building a home, but a church. The architectural plans of his proposed shrine included towers for each earthly direction. My parents' house was to his north. He had already built the east, west, and south. To build the north tower, he needed a variance from my parents. Stanley claimed to be a minister of something I recall sounding like the Charismatic Pentecostal Assemblies of God. I listened to the debate about Stanley's variance. My dad's view was commercial. He would grant the variance in exchange for a ridiculously large payment. Mom's position was simple. Stanley was an asshole, and because of that, she would do everything she could to thwart his plans. Mom won. My friend Charlie and I overheard through a door Narf's mother confiding to my mom that her 9-year-old son, Joey, had been diagnosed with terminal spinal cancer. Then we heard Joey's mother repeat what Stanley had told her. The exchange was initiated because one of Joey's dying wishes was to have a kitten, which they bought for him. The kitten often got loose and walked on Stanley's property. Stanley approached the mother to complain that the kitten was not welcome and went so far as to say that if he finds the kitten near his house again, he'll kill it. She added, "Stanley also told me that if my faith in the Lord was stronger, my son wouldn't be ill." The kitten disappeared, and Joey passed away not long after. Charlie and I hadn't walked through Stanley's yard to Narf's all winter. But after overhearing what he'd said to Joey's mother, all respect for Stanley's wishes was gone. As we approached the property line between Stanley and Narf's, we spotted the lifeless kitten on Stanley's territory in the final remnants of that year's snow. Its head was deformed and looked like it had possibly been hit with a hammer. Charlie and I left it there and went to see Narf, the deceased boy's older brother. We shared our discovery about the kitten and discussed what action to take. Narf was consumed with grief and had no interest in our desire for justice. We returned to my house. To each other, Charlie and I declared war on Stanley. We weighed the merits and disadvantages of numerous plans. Setting fire to Stanley's house in the middle of the night was initially at the top of our list, but because my house and Narf's were so close to his, it was likely we'd also catch on fire. Arson was abandoned. Then Charlie suggested a brilliant opening attack. Let's drill holes in his roof. When we plotted the plan's execution, we only knew about electric drills. Extension cords long enough to reach could be arranged. We were sure that we could get volunteers to help, but the noise from the drill was likely to catch someone's attention. If the police arrived, it would be difficult to explain why someone was on the neighbor's roof with a drill. During school lunch, we asked others how to theoretically execute the idea. Someone told us about his dad's handheld drills and how well they worked. We borrowed 2. Stage 1 of Operation Stanley was successfully concluded. Stanley built a tunnel from the main house to what I suppose was a church sanctuary. If the structure had been attached to the house, it would have intersected with the south tower. The tunnel allowed people to get to the sanctuary without going outside. Stanley held what some might call sermons. They seemed to us like seances. In the winter, my friend and I would watch through the windows as attendees flopped on the floor like fish out of water. Some flailed their arms like those nylon advertising aids that have high-speed air blowing through them, convulsing like a person tripping on flakka. There was plenty of loud gibberish or speaking in tongues. The flopping and flailing were allegedly the result of various spirits passing through their bodies. When it warmed, the sight of wide-open windows and Stanley's sanctuary with his congregation inside was too much temptation. We had not forgotten about Joey's kitten. Fireworks were illegal to sell, possess, or use in Minnesota. My older brother and a friend had recently returned from a drive to South Dakota where fireworks were and are totally legal. The two stuffed the trunk of the car with contraband fireworks. The 4th of July was not far off, and they knew that they would be able to at least quadruple their investment by reselling them in Minnesota. When my brother showed me the stash in his trunk, I was flabbergasted. Before then, a strip of 24 firecrackers was a big deal to have. I was in awe looking at multiple bricks, each containing 1,280. He had rockets, Roman candles, and things I didn't even know existed. I immediately called Charlie and told him to quickly bring as much cash as possible. We pooled all our money and spent everything we had on fireworks. We rationed them pretty well, partially because lighting more than 1 or 2 during a regular weekday was likely to catch the attention of the police. The sound of explosions was uncommon. On a Friday before the 4th of July, Stanley had a crowd of approximately 30 people in his sanctuary. All the windows and sliding doors were open. Charlie saw the scene and said to me, "We've got to hit him. Get the rockets." The mission demanded stealth and precision. Stanley's backyard was fairly well illuminated. If we were close enough to aim, we'd be close enough to be seen. Charlie and I went into my dad's workshop and found sections of plastic pipe. We rigged up a variation of a rotary cannon that could launch 4 rockets at once. At the edge of the darkness in Stanley's backyard, we tried to calculate the trajectory of the rockets and plotted our escape route along the river. The plan was to light the 4 rockets, flee to the river, and throw the cannon into the water. The river's current would take it downstream. Then we'd run as fast as possible 3 houses to the north and hide behind a neighbor's pigeon coop, which was about 15 yards from the river's edge. From there, we could watch for someone coming after us. If necessary, we could sneak into the water and swim away. It was exhilarating to light the rockets and drop them into the tubes. We both lit too. The first went left and high, exploding so far away above my front yard it was barely audible. The second flew high and exploded above Stanley's front yard, also barely audible. The third was a jackpot. It flew perfectly through the center of the open sliding door and exploded on the sanctuary's wall, dispersing multiple colors across the room and leaving a smoky haze. The fourth's fuse was delayed. We knew it had definitely been lit, but it didn't come out. We were looking at each other with panic. If we left the pipes, my father would certainly identify us as the source. If we took a lit rocket with us, it might explode on us. Before we could decide, it finally took off. Like the second, it went high. 1 out of 4 was pretty good for beginners. We couldn't hear a single comment, but the collective sound was that of thoroughly stunned people. I tossed the pipes in the river and ran as fast as I could in the direction of the pigeon coop. About 30 feet away from it, my left shin smacked into a square metal crossbar of an iron chair that was on the neighbor's lawn. How do I know? I returned in the daylight to see what I'd run into. I did a front flip after hitting it, but can't remember how I landed. It was so unexpected and hurt so much I couldn't believe my leg wasn't broken. After the initial shock, I focused on reaching the pigeon coop, where Charlie was waiting. I started to tell him about my possibly broken leg. He told me to keep quiet and stay alert. We sat there in silence for what seemed like an hour. We didn't see even a flashlight and walked back. That we could have seriously injured innocent people never entered our minds. Another thing that we never thought about was that Stanley and his church could be under investigation and that law enforcement agents were part of his congregation. The lack of reaction to the rocket and fact that they didn't call the police was disconcerting. We still wanted to push Stanley out of the neighborhood, but vowed to use more subtle tactics. While returning from a boat ride, I noticed that Stanley had put in a dock, but didn't yet have a boat. I mentioned this to the Operation Stanley team, aka Justice for Joey. Someone suggested that when he did get a boat, we should let it loose so the river's current could take it a few miles south, where it would be smashed going over a dam. Stanley eventually parked about an 18-foot Glastron in the dock. I declined to let it loose, but advised others to go for it, which they did. Unfortunately, the boat floated downstream only about a half a mile and got caught up in the branches of a willow tree. The boat was returned to Stanley unharmed. A few weeks later, I was floating down the middle of the river in our boat with only my dog, a spaniel. We were near a community college, next to which on shore was a popular swimming place with a rope swing. The boat's stern was facing south. As I looked in that direction, I noticed a boat headed straight towards me. Its bow was up. I estimated its speed at about 25 miles per hour. Boats of that size tend to plane out around 30 miles per hour. Its course didn't change and continued straight at us. I stood up and started waving my hands over my head. The driver did not seem to notice. Once it became clear that a collision was unavoidable, I picked up my dog and jumped off the starboard side into the river. From the water, I watched the other boat's raised bow crash into our stern and launch about 10 feet into the air. It splashed down without any other contact. Once idle, I could see Stanley at the helm. He was unfazed. He stared at me and calmly said, "I'm sorry, I could have killed you." The slight stress he placed on the word killed caught my attention. The sound of approaching sirens got louder on both shores of the river. I could see a sheriff's boat speeding towards us from the south. Accidents on that section of the river were so rare that I can't recall ever hearing of another one. I reported to my friends what Stanley had done, said, and how he acted, and suggested maybe we should back off for a while. Instead of retreating or taking a break, the consensus was that an escalation of hostilities was in order. Up until that point, all of our attacks had been in his backyard. It seemed logical that he wouldn't expect one from the front. The driveway was his congregation's parking lot, It was about 2.5 cars wide and about 60 yards long. The borders on either side were lined with fairly mature lilac bushes that were at least 15 feet tall. The plan was to put sugar in as many gas tanks in the cars of Stanley's guests as quickly as possible and be gone. The evening the cars started rolling in, Charlie and I called every volunteer on our list and reminded them to bring sugar and wear dark clothes. Every cool kid in the neighborhood came to help. We took our positions in the lilacs. A lookout in the back sent a flashlight signal once all the people were in the sanctuary. We emerged from the bushes, walking with quick, short strides, crouched over, trying not to stand taller than the cars. The vehicular ambush had begun. In total, I'd estimate that we hit 17 or 18 cars, but nowhere near the 30 or 40 that was our goal. Perhaps a coincidence, but the operation seemed to be a success. Early the next week, a for sale sign went up in front of Stanley's house, and he was gone shortly thereafter. The couple who bought the place lived there for at least 40 years and encountered no similar problems, except for one time on the 4th of July when we were jointly celebrating. A mortar accidentally fell over and launched in the direction of the former sanctuary and missed high. My journey started in Frau Vickerman's 7th grade German class. Learning about the nuances of ways to express oneself fascinated me like no other subject. By 9th grade, I'd finished the entire high school curriculum and wanted more. With a dictionary in hand, I read my first foreign language novel, Friedrich Dürrenmatt's Der Richter und sein Henker, The Judge and His Hangman. Topics related to Germany's terrible recent history drew me towards politics as well. When I was ready for college, my mom told me to study a real language, saying, like Chinese or Russian. I wanted to show her I was up to the challenge, and chose to apply at George Washington University, only because in some book it was rated number 1 for Russian. The combination of a Russian education and real-life living conditions in a political capital sent me down the rabbit hole of Alice in Wonderland that can also be called SOVOK. Arthur Schopenhauer wrote, "The first 40 years of life give us the text. The next 30 supply the commentary on it." I'm not convinced there won't still be more commentary just on the text I've omitted, not to mention what I've been up to since.